This is Marco Reus, and you're listening to the Yellowwallpod podcast.
Welcome to episode 311 of the Yellowwallpod. I'm your host, Stefan Butzko. For this new year, 2020 is upon us. It's the first episode of the new year, and today we will talk about Borussia Dortmund's new signing, Erling Braut Haaland, who we have yet to talk about, and Julian Weigl leaving Borussia Dortmund for Benfica. And we have to preview Saturday's game against FC Augsburg as the Bundesliga restarts, and for all that and more, join me once again in the new year. Hello, Lars Pollmann. How are you doing?
Hello, Stefan. I am as fine as I was 16 days ago.
I hear you are very well rested now because the pesky Patriots are no longer interrupting your sleeping pattern.
Who?
The New England Patriots.
Never heard of them.
All right. That's good to hear. Neither have I, because all I have heard is the Green Bay Packers. And with that, also here, the one and only Matthias Zug. How are your Cowboys doing, huh?
All right, well, that was a fun podcast. So you can find me on Twitter at, I am doing fine, and I'm actually okay because there's finally a new head coach in Dallas, so we'll see how that goes. But anyway, how are you, Stefan?
I'm doing well, thank you very much. Still a bit under the weather, so if my voice sounds even more camp than usual, that's because my nose is stuffy. But all that aside, we are very happy to be back. At least I am. Don't want to speak for everyone else. And Dortmund, of course, have made some news during the winter break by signing Erling Haaland from RB Salzburg. I think we were all sort of anticipating that transfer, but now it's official, and he has already played one underwhelming 45 minutes in a friendly against Mainz, which is coincidentally also the only minutes that I've watched of Dortmund's training camps. So I'm not too overwhelmed with that overall showing, but we can talk about that later. Last top line reaction, what do you make of this transfer? Do you think it helps Dortmund, or do you think it has negative consequences for the club in one or many forms?
Well, I'm certainly happy that they got the man they clearly wanted. And I think in terms of, thinking of transfers as like shows of power or whatever, it's certainly a sign of strength for Dortmund to have that kind of pull on a player that could easily have joined Manchester United, Juventus Turin, RB Leipzig, and presumably a host of other clubs. So for him to choose Dortmund, that's certainly a positive for me. I'm a bit reserved on how he actually fits into the squad, just because of the Favre factor, because, typically, even though there are some cases where he has played an out-and-out striker, he's been a coach for most of his career, and certainly in the Bundesliga that hasn't really relied on, that big target man, number 9, which Haaland in some ways represents. It was clearly something they lacked in their squad as an option. I don't necessarily agree with all these people who during the first half of the season and maybe even second half last season clamored for a true striker as the main difference between Dortmund and, a title winning side. I think there are other areas of concern in Dortmund's team that haven't been addressed. We'll talk about Julian Weigl, but I think they actually weakened the most important position in modern football needlessly. So I'm not sure how much of an impact that is going to have. So for Haaland, I mean, he's 19. He hasn't played in a top league. I know he scored 8 goals in the Champions League, but, I think 4 of those came against Genk, which is a Belgian side. So I think there's obviously reason for optimism because all these clubs wanted him, and Dortmund have a pretty good track record with, these major talents. I'd say they haven't been great with, the smaller prospects, the Sergio Gomez's of the world.
Or Mikel Merino's, yeah.
Don't do that to me, Stefan. It's the first show of 2020. But with the big guys, the Sanchos, I think that's the kind of talent that we're looking at. So I'm sure he's going to turn out just fine for Dortmund. Just the question is, when will he start to make a real impact? And is that in time for, this season to be saved, if you like, seeing as, 30 points from the Hinrunde is really not much to be proud of.
No, yeah, I agree with that, definitely. Matthias, how happy are you or excited about this transfer? Do you think, as Lars said, that's, bit of sending a signal to other teams since he was such a sought-after talent? Or do you also have some reservations about this transfer, not least because there are reports that there is a release clause in his contract now, which, correct me if I'm wrong, Lars, but triggers in 2022? Nobody
really knows.
Okay. Matthias?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of rumors there, and 2022 is also what I heard, but, Michael Zorc said we don't talk about contracts, which is fine, because at the end of the day, it's nobody's damn business, except for the employer and the employee. The overall implications, I think, are all the positive things that Lars talked about, the signal that it sends. But beyond that, we kind of talked about it in one of the last episodes, where it not just fills certain areas of concern or need that needed to be addressed in the squad, so on the pitch, but also off the pitch. It obviously attracts more eyeballs to Dortmund. Dortmund were the talk of the footballing world then again for a couple of weeks because of this. I always find it ironic that nowadays other clubs that don't get a player send out these idiotic press releases and tweets saying, well, we never wanted him anyway. Bayern are pretty good at that. Manchester United are getting good at that too. And it's just like, now you just look like a freaking idiot. So it would have been better if you just would have just not said anything. And now you just look like a moron because of course you wanted the player. I'm thinking also of Julian Brandt and Bayern where they're like, we didn't want him anyway. It's like, of course you did. Don't be an asshole. But beyond that, obviously, it attract more eyeballs to Dortmund. The one negative, of course, is going to be the Jadon Sancho type thing where every few months we're like, whoa, when's he going to go to a real club, a big club, the Premier League, as an example, Manchester United. And obviously that'll come down to how well he performs or not. If he delivers on the trajectory that he is currently playing, it's going to be phenomenal. If he just develops to the level of his age and the raw talent that's there, Dortmund still got a player for pretty cheap at the end of the day. Even with the supposed add-ons in today's market, that's pretty cheap given how hotly handled he was. So I don't see any negatives there. I personally just see positives, but just like Lars said, I don't think this is the catalyst to a title. There's more to it than that. Football is complex, and I know we like simplistic hot takes nowadays, but having the quote-unquote...
Especially you.
Oh, yeah, especially me. The quote-unquote... traditional target man number 9, which, just so you know, Haaland is not that. He is not a Kopfballungeheuer, as we would say in German, so someone who heads in a lot of goals. He's a very technical player. He likes the ball to feet. And so he's just, not he's not a Batshuayi type guy or a Lewandowski per se, and he's still really young, but I think it benefits the side for sure. How that fits in with what Favre likes to do, like Lars said as well, he tends to not like an out-and-out striker, even though he did make Balotelli work at Nice. And getting Balotelli to work is kind of a feat unto itself these days. So we'll see how it goes. But overall, very positive.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Athletic wrote that Dortmund scouted him 28 times. And I think in that same article, even though I haven't read it fully, but, excerpts were published elsewhere, it said that Thomas Delaney lobbied him as well to come to Dortmund. But as it turns out, Erling Haaland told the Bundesliga that the transfer was all him.
It was actually me who asked my dad, Dortmund is, that would be nice. And he said, I don't know, I have no idea, I have to check. And then that's how it came up. So it was actually me asking my dad.
So, Lars, what do you make of this? Do you think that it was that simple that Haaland just said, Dad, I want to join Dortmund?
Obviously not. I mean, he certainly seems to be playing the media game pretty well. I don't know if you guys caught his introductory media roundtable thingy, which Dortmund have published on their YouTube page, I think. I mean, he is a man of very few words. And those words are carefully selected by himself and everyone around him, I'm pretty sure. So, I mean, we know he took multiple visits elsewhere. He was at Leipzig on the same day he spent with Dortmund earlier in the day or later in the day. I don't remember the exact details. We know he had discussions with Juventus and United. So I think we have to take it with a fairly large grain of salt that his mind was made up once Dortmund called or whatever. But, he certainly seems to be selling that idea pretty well. And for one thing, I like how he says Dortmund. It almost sounds like a German there. So that's pretty nice.
Yeah, he also even cleared up for us how to pronounce his name.
If you're not in Norway, you can say Erling Braut Haaland, and if you're in Norway, you can say Erling Braut Haaland.
There you go. So, I don't know. It was funny at the end of the interview. I don't have that snippet or that roundtable as you called it. He said that he always liked Dortmund, and then someone asked him to clarify what is it, the fans, the stadium, the football style, or the colors, and he's like, yep, all of that. So I think we can all take this with the Erling Braut Haaland size grain of salt, but nevertheless, it's going to be very interesting. Also, how he's going to be integrated, because I would at least say that toward the end of the Hinrunde, Lucien Favre found a system that sort of had his mojo and had his flow, but the line then was led by Marco Reus, of course, in a 3-4-3 system, if you will. And you can play the same system with both Reus and Haaland, because obviously, where would you play Reus then? Maybe on the wing, but where would you play Hazard then? So, there are a couple of questions how Favre will set up his system to fit Haaland into this. I assume there's no other. I don't even know if we'll see a 4-4-2 system with both Paco Alcácer and Haaland at the same time. I'm very intrigued to see that, but I would assume that it will take a while until we see Haaland start. I don't know how about you guys, but I anticipate that it's going to take a while, just because of the little time they had to gel, and Lucien Favre usually likes to take things slow with players anyway. So, Lars, how do you reckon how many first team minutes we'll see from Haaland? Do you think he'll be more of a super sub, or maybe in 5 match days into the Rückrunde we'll see him starting and not leaving the starting lineup?
Well, I think they kind of sold him on the idea of him getting a starting spot almost immediately at Dortmund, which is arguably the biggest reason why he joined them, as opposed to going, for example, to Juventus or Leipzig, who have quite a lot of strikers in their squads right now, but, you know, more of a down the road need in that position. So I think it would be kind of hard to explain to him and his camp how Dortmund, who don't really have a striker outside of him, because, you know, Paco, we don't know that he's going to be here. We don't know that he wants to be here. And certainly we know that he hasn't scored since, I think, September 14th. So it's not like, you know, he has a starting spot that Haaland needs to challenge or anything. So I would assume that he's going to be the regular starter as soon as he can be. Obviously, that might take a while. As you mentioned, he missed, I think, like in total, something like 4 weeks with a slight knee problem. It only cost him, I think, a couple of days of team training in the training camp in Marbella in Spain. But even if he had been a part of all those practice days, it might have been a tall task for him to make the starting 11 for the Augsburg match and maybe even the Cologne match, which is kind of a short turnaround because it's on Friday evening. But overall, I think the plan has to be to integrate him after, you know, fighting so hard to get him and, you know, fending off considerable opposition for his services. So I think the good thing, obviously, is Dortmund are still in 3 competitions. They have, I think, 3 Bundesliga matches, Augsburg, Cologne, and Union before the Cup round of 16 against Werder Bremen. Then it's almost time for the Champions League matches against Paris. So there's going to be enough opportunity to go around for all the attacking players. And, you know, typically there's no shortage of injuries at Dortmund. So, you never know if Marco Reus can play 25, it's probably not going to be 25, but like 20, 21 matches in the second half of the season. Sancho has had a few problems, not necessarily with injuries, let's put it that way. And also because most people think Torgan Hazard. I mean, right now, Torgan is the only...
Bury delete here, huh? Am I right?
I mean, right now, Torgan is clearly better than Eden, who is both overweight and injured. But, I mean, what I was going to say was that Torgan Hazard plays left wing back for Belgium pretty much regularly. So I think there is another opportunity to integrate him because we've seen that Favre doesn't like to play Rafael Guerreiro game in, game out. And I mean, Nico Schulz hasn't really warranted being included in that discussion necessarily. So I could see, the odd occasion where Hazard is the odd man out in attack for Haaland, but still in the starting lineup.
Yeah, same question to you, Matthias. How do you think Haaland will integrate into Dortmund? How will his integration change Dortmund as well?
Well, you hope it wouldn't dramatically impact the good setup that was found towards the end of the Hinrunde. But obviously he's a completely different player than the quote-unquote strikers that were used at that time, given that we actually had strikers and they weren't being played. But I think actually he could function in that system. And what it will give you is just greater rotation options. I mean, I know Favre isn't Mr. Rotation per se, but I don't know if that's simply down to lack of options or lack of trust. I would ideally like to continue with the back 3 system, because I feel like the team gelled really, really well. And I think Haaland can function in that system. I don't see why not. I mean, given that he's not just a big lumpy striker at the top, but also a technically gifted, young, agile player, I think he could fit into that rather well. And you do have that change of pace with Paco because he is different. Obviously, he's differently built, so he can move differently and play differently. You combine that, and you have some interesting options, whether you play with a single striker or two strikers up top at a back three formation. But then, of course, you're asking who behind him won't play, be a Sancho, a Reus, or an Hazard. But those options and that rotation option is very, very important because, as Lars said, we're in quite a few competitions and they're going to come thick and fast. And so you need to make sure that you have the ability to rotate matches that aren't maybe as difficult. I hate using that term because every match is difficult, but you know what I mean? I mean, not every match, not every match is Paris, so to speak, or a cup tie or something like that. So, that you can rest certain key players at certain times in the attacking third. Even though that's not my greatest concern. My greatest concern is now possible lack of depth in the central midfield.
Yeah, we will talk about this in a second, but first, I do want to mention that I'm very excited about the burst of speed that Erling Haaland has. He's just very, very fast on the first, 10 meters or so. Reminds me a bit of Aubameyang in that regard, even though he's very tall and, runs a bit awkwardly, but I don't think that's going to be an issue. And obviously, to have a player that can use his physique is nice, even though he is not the player that does a lot of holder play, but he still can do it. And I'm excited, and I really do hope that Dortmund players draw the right conclusions, that they don't just look at Haaland and see that he's tall and try to cross it high to him, because as we've already pointed out, he's a player that likes the ball on the ground and he can dribble a bit. But what I'm not looking forward to is, his first touch is sometimes a bit frustrating. From what I've seen is that he likes to do little flick-ons here and there, a bit like Alcázar, which then go wayward. We'll see. But I don't know. In one way, I thought it was good for the club to really, exploit the hype that was created around this transfer and get as much quote unquote reach as possible. On the other hand, I'm a bit more reserved. I don't think he will be a starter right away, and I think he will be nurtured a bit longer, but who knows what the circumstances are in a week or in 2 weeks. So I don't really know, but I don't foresee him to start in the next 4 out of 5 games right away. I don't know. Have to figure it out on the way. I guess that's one of the negatives of signing a player in the winter, but the positive is then he will be completely and fully integrated, hopefully, by the start of the next season. So that at least should be exciting. And obviously what also should be exciting is the link-up play between him and Sancho and Reus and all these very quick players that like to combine in a way that I think fits Haaland very well. And one thing that I'm aligned a little bit in the Hinrunde is that Dortmund's counterattacks weren't always the best. I think they had a lot of potential for more counterattacks, considering when they were in a lead and sitting back. So there was a lot of space to exploit that they did not exploit in the end. And I hope and pray that Haaland will improve at least that aspect, because I very much see him as a transition striker. So that's at least what I'm excited about. But of course, something else happened during the winter break. I wasn't really surprised, but maybe some people seem to be surprised by the destination, because Julian Weigl joined Benfica. Lars, and you have already said that you think Dortmund have weakened themselves in central midfield. So what are your thoughts on Julian Weigl joining the Portuguese league?
I was very much surprised by the destination, because, Benfica doesn't necessarily come to mind for a still relatively young player from Germany who moves from the second leading team in the league, not necessarily in terms of table, but, standing and recent history and whatnot. So even if perhaps, the PSG and Man City or whatever who might have come in for him after, a top class season. Even if those weren't interested, I was assuming that, not necessarily better clubs, but just ones that are more in focus here in Germany might come in for him. But maybe he thought, let's go completely out of my comfort zone, go somewhere where I probably will have a pretty hard time understanding the language, because learning Portuguese is pretty hard for German speakers. So, and obviously, I mean, as far as, living somewhere goes in Europe, I think you could do a lot worse than Lisbon, which is, as many people will say who have been there, I haven't, unfortunately, one of the, if not the greatest city in Europe to, spend time in or live in. So maybe that played a part in it, but I also didn't really understand it from Dortmund's perspective, because they left themselves quite vulnerable, as I said, in the arguably most important position in modern football. I mean, even if Weigl wasn't considered a regular starter by design, he still played, I think, 15 matches in the first half of the season alone in midfield. So that's something they need to replace. And I mean, right now, the only replacements are, I guess, Thomas Delaney, who missed some time in the first half of the season, leading to Weigl playing, Mahmoud Dahoud, who is very much a different player, as is Delaney, for that matter, and Tobias Raschel, who, I mean, for all the laurels he's gotten over performances for the under-19 team and in the youth league, he still hasn't played in a competitive match for the first team. So I kind of don't understand why Dortmund would do this. I mean, they did their usual thing and said, oh, he has played for us so long, he's been such a good soldier that we are going to grant him his wish. But I mean, okay.
Marcel Schmelzer might like a word with that.
First of all, that, and second of all, I mean, okay, but why don't you do something else about it? I mean, I honestly don't really understand how Dortmund can go into a season saying we want the championship and go into the second half of the season spending 20 million on a striker, which is, in my opinion, almost a luxury transfer in terms of Dortmund squad planning, and then turn around and say, you know what, the only guy who can do some of the things that Axel Witsel does for us, who is now 31 years old, I think, and has had a few injury issues, obviously coming with age. I don't understand why Dortmund do this, and certainly don't understand why they don't turn around and, get someone else in. I mean, I'm basically guaranteeing you right now that in the summer there's going to be a lot of talk about, a starting caliber defensive midfielder coming in, because in the second half of the season you will probably see that, they are one short in that regard. So I don't understand it from the club's perspective. I kind of don't understand it from Weigl's perspective, but I mean, who am I to say anything about a player getting his wish?
Matthias, what are your thoughts on Weigl leaving to Benfica?
I mean, it's not a huge surprise. I mean, it was surprised it was Benfica, but I think he'll do well there. Portugal's a great country. It's a great city. I've enjoyed time there, so I can see that appeal. As far as the squad depth, that is a concern, because I'm not seeing the player off the top of my head who can fulfill the Witsel role when Witsel needs a break, or he's suspended, or he's injured. Now, selling a backup player for a decent fee who is probably also earning a good amount of money, I don't have an issue with that at all. I also don't have an issue at all with Weigl per se going, simply because, he had an amazing time under Thomas Tuchel that one season, but ever since then, things really haven't quite gone his way. And that's not all entirely up to him. Obviously, manager changes, system changes, stuff like that. He was versatile, but the problem with him was he just lacked any form of pace. And I think that's why you look at it and go, okay, there's a good chance that Dortmund will get hit on the counter a few times, playing on the front foot, and Weigl is just he just can't cope with that in going back. So I'm okay with it from that standpoint, but I just don't know who else there is in a backup role who can fit the Witsel position. But I don't know. I mean, maybe Balerdi, he's played defensive midfielder. I don't know. I'm sure they didn't do this without considering that, because it's a rather obvious consideration to think about. So maybe it's Rasche, maybe it's Balerdi, maybe it's somebody we're not even thinking of right now. But I'm sure there is a plan. What it is right now, I'm not 100% sure. So I guess we'll have to wait and see.
I guess that's what we refer to as blind trust. But I actually had to chuckle a little bit when I read that Weigl joined Benfica, and this is like a very tiny anecdote, which is also not a great arc or anything, but the very first international game I covered for ESPN on the road was the quarterfinal in 2017 against Benfica, and that was one of the games where Julian Weigl actually played really, really well. And I think Dortmund somehow still managed to lose this, even though I think Aubameyang missed a penalty and all that. Anyway, a barrage of chances, and Julian Weigl was amazing in this game. And it was at a time where other Bundesliga teams had figured out how to mark him, or rather that it's very important and key to man mark him. And the mixed zone of the stadium was set up in a way that the players had to pass the pen where the journalists are to make it to the team bus. Now, Dortmund overall are very notorious for sneaking their players either not even through that or just find a different exit or whatever, because for some reason they do not adhere to the UEFA regulations that every player in the Champions League has to go through the mixed zone. But so I just wanted to have a one-on-one interview, and I sort of stalked Weigl around the fence and stopped him for a conversation, even though he didn't really wanted to talk to me. But I was like, mate, I made all this, I flew here just to talk to you. So he was nice enough. And in the end, basically my question, or one of the questions, was whether he was surprised by the shitty scouting, since he had all that space and no one really marked him. And he was very frank, which is something that I always appreciate about Weigl. And he just said, I can't believe I was that open, sort of agreeing with the poor job that Benfica have done. So in hindsight, it's a little bit funny that this was this one Benfica experience, and it didn't reflect too well on the club from a tactical standpoint. But I don't think these things play too much of a role. I don't even know if the same coach, I think it was Jorge Jesus at the time, is still at Benfica. So I don't know, but just a little anecdote of the one talk I had with Julian Weigl one-on-one in the mixed zone in Lisbon. Anyway, and for what it's worth, the food in Lisbon is really, really good. So that's definitely a plus for why you would join this very beautiful city. So anyway, that's pretty much all I have to say on the subject, because you two both covered it quite well. So that brings us to our next little transfer, tidbit, and that is Jakob Brünn-Larsen, because Lars, you for Fußball.news have a couple of informations on that potential transfer to Frankfurt, or not potential transfer. Tell us what you know.
I have heard that there are discussions between Dortmund and Frankfurt over possibly a loan of Brünn-Larsen, which I think today has been reported now by a number of outlets in Germany. The thing is that I'm not sure that there's necessarily a plan as yet, whether that's going to be a pure loan or maybe a loan with an option, or I could even see Dortmund selling him outright just because he doesn't really have much of a role in the squad at this point. He really fell off the radar in the first half of the season, and from my perspective, he just doesn't have, Dortmund quality. So I think you would be delaying the inevitable if you didn't just try to sell him right now. And I think Frankfurt are, a club that is in need of wingers. They have a few injury issues at the moment. They tumbled down the table towards the latter half of the Hinrunde. So that seems to be a situation where, a couple of signings until January 31st might make sense. But, whether Brun Larsen ends up there or sticks put, that's still anybody's guess, I think.
Yeah, well, my personal hope is also that Dortmund sell him sooner rather than later, just because of the things you mentioned. I also don't believe that he has Dortmund quality. And so, I don't know. You also just want to clear the path for Gio Reyna. You could do that with Brun Larsen there, obviously, but, he has been made a full member now of the first team. So that's positive news, I guess, for the American listeners there who are excited about the kid. I don't know. I don't want to build too many expectations, but from what I see is at least that there is more talent in him than in Brun Larsen, especially in the aspect of being able to dribble and beat the opponent. I think that's key for Dortmund to have players like that, and Brun Larsen just doesn't do that very often. He has other strengths, but so, I hope that somehow there is a development this season that whatever minutes Brun Larsen would have gotten, that Gio Reyna gets them and does better than the Danish man. But I don't know if this bears out. Matthias, any thoughts on Brun Larsen, or do you want to go on to Augsburg?
I think we can move on to Augsburg.
All right. So, Augsburg right now in 10th place, and they have collected more points in their last 6 games in the league than Dortmund. So, that being said, I think we all remember the opener very fondly, where Augsburg were shellacked by Dortmund 5-1. Also thanks to their goalkeeper Kubek. A game that looked very promising for Dortmund. And then the next 2 games against Cologne and Union Berlin were very quickly to remind us that it's very wrong to dream about anything based on the very first performance in the season. I don't know if Augsburg really have developed much according to this, across the season, because the strong run toward the end of the Hinrunde came against mid-table sides and relegation dwellers. So it's going to be a very interesting game. I don't know how the weather will be and how the pitch is looking in Augsburg, but it's, I don't know. I'm just never looking forward to games in Augsburg per se. Matthias, what kind of game do you expect?
Well, as long as Raul Bobadilla isn't playing, I think we can banish ghosts of Augsburg past. Augsburg, I don't think they're very good. They're a relegation type team. It's going to be a very ugly game. It's going to be a physical game. It seems like it's the same thing we say all the time when it comes to Augsburg, right? I don't expect that to be any different. It's going to be very, very uncomfortable for Dortmund. And given that the weather will definitely not be as nice as it was in the summer, just by nature of it being cold, I think that benefits Augsburg more when it comes to comfort or lack thereof. Even though I do believe Dortmund will come away with a victory here, it's going to be very ugly, very frustrating, and another one of those where it's like you just got to be patient. And I wouldn't be surprised if Augsburg score from a set piece or some crap goal, just because in my bones, I feel like it's going to be that kind of match. I can already see the Twitter headlines. It's not going to be a fun match to watch, in my opinion, but the result will be the right result. And at the end of the day, playing Augsburg in Augsburg this time of year, that's really all you want.
Yeah, so Lars, the only minutes of Dortmund I've seen in 2020 were the second half against Mainz, which was atrocious and disastrous. I have no other way to put it. So is there a way you can make me more optimistic and hopeful about Saturday's game, or is this what I'm going to see now on Saturday as well, where Dortmund are very lethargic, commit needless errors, and concede on a set piece?
I don't really know what to tell you, Stefan. Short answer, no. I can't. I mean, this is who Dortmund are. I mean, I would discount largely, attacking performances in preseason, especially winter prep games. Like, they don't care about these games. They are just a way to, entertain your players during a training camp, especially when it's all condensed in the winter as opposed to the summer, where there's a bit more time to get ready for the season. So, I mean, for them to not have like a single good attack in a goalless draw against Standard Liège, I don't care about that. But, both against Feyenoord and Mainz, they conceded dumb goals after individual mistakes, Roman Bürki, Manuel Akanji especially, which, that has nothing to do with the winter break and the games not counting. I mean, we've seen individual mistakes time and time again during the first half of the season, and there's no real reason to expect that to change just because there's now a different digit at the end of the year. So, I mean, they are still going to be mistake prone until they prove otherwise. So that's something to not look forward to, I guess. But, overall, as I said, don't really count attacking performances. And in that department, they looked kind of good after changing the system outside of that Hoffenheim game. But I think they were kind of on their last legs in that game. But I mean, arguably the best 45 minutes since early in autumn were the first half against Leipzig, in my opinion. That was the second last game of the season, of the Hinrunde. So it's not like we don't have anything to go on in terms of decent or even good performances going forward. So I guess there comes the optimism. But, generally speaking, it's Augsburg, as you guys mentioned, even though Dortmund don't have a terrible record in Augsburg, outside of the Dongwon-ji festival of, I think, March 2019, when they hilariously lost 2-1 at Augsburg. It's still, the kind of opponent that makes your life difficult by being bang average for the Bundesliga. But, that's something they have to deal with. And it's kind of a good litmus test almost as to whether they're for real or not in the second half of the season, because after dropping so many points in the first half of the season, there's absolutely no way you can achieve any of your goals in the second half of the season unless you beat teams like Augsburg, even if it's away from home and even if it's cold or whatever. I mean, we haven't really had winter in Germany anyway.
Yeah, see, I'm so far removed from Germany right now that I'm, when I was talking about the weather, I was, asking myself whether there might be snow on the field, because that would make things maybe a bit more interesting or difficult or whatever. But you are absolutely right in the fact that I think we can just say that Dortmund really need 9 points from the first 3 games against Augsburg, Cologne, and Union Berlin, and everything else would be actually laughable and an indictment on the players' attitude. Because if you want to win the championship or anything really, these are games where you have to win without any excuses, to be honest. And going by how Dortmund ended the Hinrunde, we actually can be quite optimistic, but that depends on whether Lucien Favre holds true to the 3-4-3 system and how he plays. But I think, it's really annoying in the end that Dortmund lost to Hoffenheim, because I really do think that had a lot to do with them just being completely gassed. It's not like Hoffenheim played anything good, or I don't know, apart from those 2 plays where they scored against Dortmund. And I think Dortmund with a bit more focus could have made it 2-0 and then this game would have been dead. But these 3 points are now direly missed. And so Dortmund have to have a good start into 2020. So, I'm a bit anxious, but I do think there is reason for positivity, and I hope they can completely override my impressions from these really horrendous 45 minutes. Matthias, how should Dortmund deal with Florian Niederlechner, who is leading Augsburg in goals and assists with 8 apiece?
The same way you deal with Rowan Hennings. I mean, in the sense of he's a form striker for a crap team. I don't really think there's much. I don't think Dortmund should go out and game plan against him. I think it's more a matter of fact of Dortmund forcing themselves upon Augsburg and Augsburg game planning and figuring it out, rather than the other way around. If you're the dominant side, you look at what their strengths are, more importantly, what their weaknesses are, and you try to exploit it. But I would be surprised if go in, you're like, okay, Florian Niederlechner, man, we really got a game plan for this guy. I'm not overly concerned about that. I mean, obviously that's the ultimate jinx now, but it's not really something that I don't think anyone's going to be losing sleep over him as far as game plan goes.
Yeah, fair enough. Lars, do you expect Lichtsteiner to play as the right back? Because him and Harlau would be, the point of the field where I would point to say to my skilled players to attack right there.
No, I'm pretty sure Tin Jedwai is the right back, with Haulau, or however you pronounce his name.
No idea.
And Uduokai in the center, and obviously Philipp Max, who, in my opinion, is the best Augsburg player. Never mind Niederlechner, who is basically a 1,000-yard running back on a 7 and 9 team. Has some decent fantasy performances for you, but you don't game plan for him, as Matthias said. So no, it's to me it seems unlikely that Lichtsteiner is going to play. Certainly from the start, but I generally also think, just like Matthias said, if you go into Augsburg as Dortmund and you kind of have to figure out what they are doing, then you probably go into the game with the wrong mindset. I mean, this is your opportunity to start the second half of the season off, well on the right foot. So you should be dictating how the game goes, and the less talented team, the team with lesser individual quality, needs to adapt and not the other way around.
So here's hoping that Dortmund can actually, play the dominant football they've showed toward the end of the Hinrunde. And if they achieve that, I'm pretty positive that they will come away with the 3 points. So I think it's time for predictions. Lars, do you want to give us the honor and go first?
2-0 for Dortmund.
Matthias?
With a Haaland goal off the bench.
Good. Matthias?
I'm going to go with a 3-1 after Augsburg take a 1-0 lead thanks to a set-piece goal, and everybody freaks out, and then at the end everyone goes, oh, okay, we did it.
All right, I'm predicting a 3-0 win. I don't think Augsburg will be even on the score sheet. So why the heck not? I also predict a Haaland goal, because that's what you do now. That's what's on vogue in 2020. There's no other way around it. Lars is the trendsetter after all. So with that, Lars, how can people get in touch with you on the internet?
They can just follow me on Twitter at Lars Bollmann.
Matthias?
Yes, you can also still find me on Twitter at Matthias Suk.
And you also can find me on Twitter, even though not as frequently as usually, at Stefan Butzko, and all of us you can find at Yellowwallpod on Twitter and Facebook. And if you want to subscribe to our show, please do that via iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, SoundCloud, or YouTube. And if you want to read our written content, then go to theyellowwall.net. And if you want to become a Patreon, go to patreon.com/theyellowwall, where you can sponsor an episode for $10 a pop. So if you have any more questions about that, you can also shoot us an email at yellowwallpod@gmail.com. And that should be it from us for this week. Until next time, goodbye.